right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Carbon Reduction, Rethinking the Value Chain. I'm Peter Zemsky, a strategy professor and deputy dean at INSEAD. I'll be facilitating our discussion, which is really taking us to the heart of the topic. How do we take, hopefully many people in this audience that are responsible for big supply chains, how are we going to get the carbon out? It is obviously a challenging topic. The great thing about this session is we have a whole diverse set of views. From industry, we're going to hear from telecommunications, from pharma, we're going to hear from government, from advisory, and from tech. And the real commitment here is to try and focus on actionable insights, right? This is not about a call to action. This is about actually what actions we're looking to take. Our first speaker, coming to us all the way from Asia and Singapore, is Maya Hari, CEO of the green tech player Terrascope. Brings a deep background in tech. 7 years, she was a VP of Global Strategy and Operations for Twitter, for example, serves on many boards out in Asia, and she will talk to us about Terrascope. Come on, Maya.
Afternoon, everyone. What a privilege to be here. I have to say, it's also very nice to follow Peter Zemsky. I went to INSEAD and I had the opportunity to be in Fontainebleau a few years ago, and it was an amazing experience. So it's very nice to kind of have that INSEAD connect back. Today, what we're going to talk about is the messy world of decarbonization. Messy, imperfect world of decarbonization. Why do I say that? The fact that we're all here in this event and have been thinking about this topic of decarbonization, it's very clear that the world is going through probably the largest problem that we've had to solve as a humanity together, right? And thinking about the fact that the solution for decarbonizing the world involves a lot of different players and a lot of different actors who have to seemingly make the right decisions at the right time in synchronicity to get to a better outcome to reverse climate change. Right? So it's a tough problem. It's hard, but not, it's not impossible. So possible, certainly, but hard. Also very messy and requires us in some ways to accept the imperfections of this journey in ways that maybe we haven't thought about before. So that's what we're going to spend the next 18 minutes talking about, the messy, imperfect world of decarbonization. Okay? With me so far? So, a little bit of introduction about me. I'm Maya Hari. I'm the CEO for Terrascope. Terrascope is an end-to-end decarbonization SaaS platform. We're very focused on using machine learning and data science to be able to transform the decarbonization journey, especially as large companies need to go through this. But it's not the only hat I wear. I'm a technologist. I've been in technology for 23 years. And aside from that, I'm an angel investor. I'm a board director. I'm an urban farmer in my personal life, and I'm most importantly a mother. And I have to tell you, and maybe some of you will share this type of experience with me, my 2 kids look at me and feel a deep sense of insecurity on what the life will be for them when they're my age, what I am today. And that, to me, has been a big driver for a lot of people, a lot of executives around the world to really feel the need to work in this space as well. So I think that's always the human reason is a very nice grounding for us to keep in mind. Let me frame the problem of messy, imperfect world of decarbonization. The protagonist in our climate change story is carbon dioxide, this seemingly innocuous, invisible gas that seems to have the entire planet hanging in a state of anxiety as to whether we will have enough years of stability and climate that we can actually operate in. So in a way, the protagonist also seems like the villain, maybe, in our story. But you also see that carbon dioxide and carbon is fundamental to a lot of our life forms on Earth. It's part of nature, it's part of oceans, it's part of minerals, it's part of our food, in a way. So is it really the villain in the story? I would like to reframe the problem that we're tackling as the carbon budget being the real challenge. And I'll explain in a minute why. We think about the budget that we have as a world, experts in IPCC that we all follow have quantified the budget that we have left to about 420 billion tons of carbon dioxide before we hit the 1.5 degree ceiling, beyond which we'll have pretty adverse effects to our climate. Today, at the rate at which we're emitting, we have less than 7 years to make an impact in order to hold against going into very dangerous territories. The good news, because I am an optimist, and you can't survive being in a climate tech world if you're not an optimist, by the way. It's very frustrating. But as an optimist, you see that the scientists actually say that if we're all able to take the biggest industries that are polluting today and invest in decarbonization solutions that are rapid, measurable, and moving the needle forward, even those 7 years, the next decade, we'll be able to do enough, right? It requires all of us to work together. The good news is the single biggest leverage is from companies. We're well organized, right? Industries, governments, we're organized in such a way that we know how to work with incentives and disincentives. So that's the optimistic piece of this problem. But when you talk to executives who have to go down this journey of decarbonization, there is a bit of fear, there's a bit of paralysis to say, I don't know, I have committed to saying that I will get to net zero by 2050, but am I doing the right things? Are we moving forward or are we moving backwards? There is a fair amount of uncertainty. The reason I think why this happens is because the journey to net zero is actually an amalgamation of two journeys. A journey which is a data journey, when you actually get down to what is the path to decarbonization. You take the emissions of a company, you look at all the data inside the company, and you put that together to form a comprehensive view of what direct and indirect emissions look like. And unless you do well in improving the data journey, you're not able to actually make a difference in the emissions reduction journey, which is the second part of this. So you kind of need to move both of those forward. And talk about messy and imperfect, whether you represent a company that's new to the climate decarbonization journey or you are well advanced into this journey, the angst tends to be in the data part of it. I don't know if I have perfect data. I don't know if I'm missing some data. What are the data gaps? I don't know what I don't know, right? And honestly, waiting for perfect data is a fool's errand. So how do we make progress in this journey, accepting the imperfect, accepting the messiness, and still making material progress? There are three areas where I think the messiness exists today. One is the data, which we talked about. Very often at Terrascope, when we profile a customer's data, this is where my team will get applause from customers. And it's so unexpected sometimes. It's when you tell people, this is the data, this is what you're missing, this is what's material to decarbonization, but you're missing, this is where we get the applause sometimes, which is so surprising. The second part is the supply chains. As we all know, supply chains are very fragmented. There are many, many suppliers around the world. You need to start knowing how to make a difference with the select set of suppliers that are really material to your business. You may not have the bargaining power to touch every supplier and be able to get the same information profile from each of them, but you need to know where to focus the attention. And the third piece is really targets and action. Even if a company has set a target at the topmost levels, is the whole organization aligned to what it needs to do in order to get there? And how do you sequence action? The sequencing and focus and priority is actually a very big part of the solution here. So very often, if you take the imperfection in these areas, people say, so what do you do? And my answer generally is, bring data and technology into the mix. And the power of data science has proven very often to be able to help in this scenario. So I want to give you an analogy. Solving the decarbonization puzzle, in my mind, is closest and akin to solving a Rubik's Cube challenge. How many cubers in the audience? Okay, I got one hand. Thank you so much. I am not an advanced cuber. I am a wannabe cuber. Okay, I watch a lot of documentaries about people who do this really well. But if you pick up a Rubik's Cube, there are two ways you could solve it. You could try it like me, slightly ineffective, but like throw yourself into it, try different moves, hope that it'll turn into a good outcome, get frustrated after a few minutes, toss it away, get distracted. Or you could do it like the cubers do, which is actually not knowing whether they will end with a cube that is perfectly colored, so not knowing if they get the perfect outcome. They actually tackle the cube layer by layer by layer. And so starting with the first layer, making progress, going to the second layer. And why I like this analogy for us is we don't exactly know what that path to decarbonization entirely along the way looks like. But we know enough to make material decisions for the first layer. And we can use data science and modeling to actually point us to the how to solve that first layer, and then kind of progress from there. So that's my fun analogy, by the way. This is how I lighten the mood with tough decarbonization talk. But let me tell you a little bit about what we're seeing at Terrascope. It's been an amazing journey in helping companies decarbonize. So we're an end-to-end decarbonization platform. What does that mean to start with? We focus on measurement of carbon footprint, including Scope 3 for supply chains, which is something we spend a lot of time on. But then, much more importantly, we focus on using data science and modeling to build a very ground-up decarbonization pathway that's very specific to the operations of a company, to their supply chain, and all of that. So if you think about what we have seen over the past year is that companies are now using this type of modeling to look at future-forward predictive analytics. So not just to model their decarbonization journey based on what is in their supply chain today, but to actually decide every future decision I make, how do I have a carbon consideration to that decision? So not different from thinking about carbon budget for the world, we're seeing companies really be inspiring in thinking about carbon budget at a very operational level. I'll give you examples of 3 companies that I have personally been very inspired by in our work together. The first is Poca. Poca is a global beverage brand, and they both manufacture beverages, but they also distribute beverages. And when in their journey of exploring their indirect emissions and direct emissions, they found that a big part of their carbon emissions was coming from the distributed part of their, sorry, my slides are slipping a little bit. Give me a second. But a big part of their supply chain carbon contribution came from a high-selling beverage that was actually something they were distributing. So they were able to actually use the platform and data science to map out 82% of the carbon footprint actually came from the packaging, and only 18% came from the drink itself. And there was a surprising part of the packaging, which was the shrink wrap of the plastic around the packaging, which was the biggest contributor to these emissions. Now, we got to this type of modeling with 92% accuracy without touching any supplier data. So is that perfect? 92 is not perfect. 100 would be perfect. But 92 is good enough to be very specific about what this company needs to do to decarbonize their emissions, right? So it's a great example of turning imperfect into a great action plan. Another company that has really inspired us has been a company called Tectis. They're a Swiss conglomerate in the area of construction design, construction technology, with a large focus on being able to do things that are good for the environment and reduce embodied carbon. And if you know the construction industry and the built environment, it's one of the hardest to decarbonize. And one of the things that they've done is actually looked at alternative technologies and tried to see which one, if they invested in and executed on, would be better for carbon footprint. And so we tested 2 things together. We tested modular construction. So do you know how you build different modular pieces and put a building together in simplistic terms? So if you took the same modular construction and built it with steel versus concrete, what would the outcome look like? And through the power of data science and the platform, we were able to actually immediately pinpoint that if you use steel in the same design, you'd actually have 20% less embodied carbon, which is a great starting point. And if you sourced the steel from a location that was renewable energy positive, better renewable energy mix in the manufacturing, you could actually bring it down to minus 30%. The other technology that we tested for them was thinking about something called as post-tensioning. You know, the concrete slabs that go into building a building. A post-tensioning is a technology that is used in that scenario, and post-tensioning would already bring down embodied carbon by multiple tens of %. And if you throw recycled materials in building that slab in the post-tensioning, you'd actually bring it down by 70%. Phenomenal roadmap, if you will, on where to go and invest in thinking about design and thinking about construction technology as they move forward. The last story I'll leave you with is Mitsubishi's Agri Alliance, which is a company that is an importer and distributor of raw commodities, if you will, agri-commodities. So the scenario in their world is that they actually source from location A, a commodity, and they actually take it to location B and distribute it there, but they also process it in location B. As they did a deeper view on their emissions in their supply chain, they were actually able to assess with the Terrascope platform that you could create a slightly different routing and a slightly different processing location. So you could take the ingredient from A, you could take it to an intermediate location, process there, it's also a shipping port, and then take it to your ultimate destination. Just by changing the routing of the supply chain and the processing location, they would actually reduce emissions in that supply chain by 25%. So, and the interesting part in this one was that not only will they have a carbon benefit, incidentally, they would also have a financial cost reduction. Not always does the financial budget and carbon budget point you in the same way, in the same direction. But when it does, it's honestly magic in sometimes. And so these are examples that have really been inspiring to see how people are using data and analytics and predictive analytics before making a decision. And the power of that is immense. You have much better predictability on what the outcomes will be. You know what the carbon impact's going to be. And you know, essentially, you do a financial budgeting exercise very often, but now you have the ability to also think about carbon budget, but in a way that is very specific to your supply chain, in a way that's very specific to your business. And so the parting thoughts I want to leave you with is that we are on a multi-decade journey to decarbonization. We do have some milestones we have to really think about and be obsessed with over the next few years. But none of this will come if we stay paralyzed because we don't have perfect data yet, or we don't have the perfect scenario, the perfect tools. So embracing imperfection is part and parcel of going down this journey of decarbonization. I think very quick add-on to that is that you have to know what is material to your business versus not. And if you know what's material, that's where you double down, and that's where you aim for improvements. With that, I think you can unlock decarbonization success. I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek because success is actually not success yet. It just means that we make progress, because we will know if we're successful when we get to 2050 and we're all comfortable and can exist without changing our clothing and our weather patterns in our homes significantly. I think it takes a village to go down this journey. None of us can actually do it alone. We need the learnings and the inspiration and the stories from each other. We need the tools that each other creates. We need to maybe even collaborate to talk to the common suppliers that we have. So it's thinking about very different world order of how we do business in order to get to this problem. But I think we can do it as a group, as a room here. I invite you to be a part of the village. I ask you to include us in your village, and let's make the next decade count. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. Do you want to really underline what she said about accepting the messiness and imperfection of the data structures? As you may know, out there, corporates are spending billions and billions on their data strategy with super mixed results. And one of the issues is they go for perfection, they never get there, and what they lose sight of, and what like best practice in data strategies is having particular projects that you focus on and you get things done. So one thing I like about what you're doing at Terrascope is, in fact, as companies, as you build your data strategy, shooting at the carbon target will not only help, I think that was your key first slide, in the decarbonization, but it's actually going to help accelerate and focus your data strategy. So thank you, Maya, for kicking us off. Next up, we have our illustrious panel discussion. So I'm going to invite to join me on stage Bruno Bonnell, Secrétaire Général pour l'Investissement France 2030, Mathieu Wallich-Petit, Partner and Head of Clients and Markets at KPMG, and Thibault, Desmarest, President, GSK France. Come on down. So let's start with company actions, and then we'll bring the government perspective in the middle. Maybe GSK first. So what is your carbon footprint? What are the key drivers, the plastic wrapping or whatever in your case? And what is the ambition at GSK?
Thanks a lot, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Thibault Desmarest, in French, sorry.
Well, Desmarest, c'est bien ça.
So just before answering to your question, Peter, let me give few words about GSK, because I'm not so sure that everybody knows GSK. So it's a global biopharma. We are investing in research. We are investing in clinical development, manufacturing, but also commercialization of drugs, but also vaccines. I don't know if you're aware, but 4 children out of 10 in the world are vaccinated by a GSK product. So we have a very, very important mission. So now if you look at GSK in France, because we are in France today, I'm French, I cannot hide it. We have 3 production sites, so it's the only European country with 3 production sites at GSK, and about 3,500 people working for GSK. And we strongly believe that a healthy planet and healthy people are strongly connected. So if you want to get ahead of disease, you do not need only to develop drugs. You need also to work on climate. You need to work also on nature. And this is what we are now doing, knowing that the SHIFT project, that you know well, I've said that in France, the healthcare system is representing about 8% of the total emission, which is not small. And the drug is about 1/3 of it. So what we have decided, and it's a pretty, I would say, bold commitment from our CEO, is to achieve nature positive, net zero by 2045 and 2030 for the entire group GSK. And we want, with our 3 production sites in France, to be the #1 contributor to this very ambitious goal. So that's in a nutshell where we are and what is GSK.
Very good. We'll definitely want to come and dig into some of the timing. But first, so when you think about actions, where do you need to address to make, what are the key things you need to make progress on?
So I really like what Maya said. I'm not really good with the Rubik's Cube, so very quickly, it's going, okay, boom, I'm not doing it. So what we are doing, let's say, basically 3 things. Number 1 is a greener product. Number 2 is a greener industry. And the third one is invest in people. But before giving a little bit more kind of information, can I ask people here, is there people who are taking Ventolin or knowing someone taking Ventolin? This is this spray, so can you please raise your hands? Wow. So you see?
This is the problem.
So, and I don't know if you're aware, but Ventolin represents half of the carbon footprint of GSK worldwide. So 50% of our carbon footprint is due to the gas and the use of these products, so production and use. So what we are now doing is we don't want to do thousands of things. So we really want you to be focused on few things, but you do it well and you do it with a lot of resources. So this is what we are now doing today with GSK. So we have a site in Évreux, so it's not too far away from Paris, for the non-French. So we are now investing on an R&D program to develop a new gas, which is much greener and that can reduce by 90% the impact of Ventolin. So this is what I mean by greener in a product. On greener industry, we are investing, and we are investing a lot because last week at Choose France, we have announced that we are investing 400 million in France for the next 3 years with GSK, within GSK, and 240 million euro is going to our production site. Modernization, digitalization, and also decarbonation. So that's what we are now doing, investing on our greener industry. Third, but not the least one, is people. So I've got some members of my team here, so all smiling. And here, what we are not doing at GSK, it's we are investing on people by also communicating a lot internally. So we've got our ESG report that we are doing, that we are mobilizing the team. We've got some shifters who came to the office this week, talking about the impact of digital, closing your laptop, sending less email, this type of very simple things that can really impact. And we are, for example, also moving all the fleet car to 100% electric by 2030, which is not a given in France. So this is what we are doing, in a nutshell, at GSK for the time being.
All right, we're definitely want to hear from the French government soon, but first, maybe Mathieu from KPMG. You're looking at many different companies. Is this representative? What kind of trends are you seeing with your client interest engagements on this? And again, what about effective actions that you see people taking?
Yeah, actually, we do see a very strong momentum. Just to give you two numbers, is that we did have a very strong activity. We tripled over the past 2 years, and we expect our activity to further triple for the next 3 years. So it's a very large momentum. It's in every discussion with our clients, actually. First, we discussed about the pressure coming from the regulation, the pressure coming from the clients or the consumers, but also the pressure coming from shareholders and other stakeholders. So we do feel with our clients this very strong pressure. That's behind a very, very high momentum. The way we assist our clients is really pragmatic. The starting point is very much to set a high ambition to reduce the carbon footprint for the supply chain. And obviously, you need behind that to build a relevant strategy, a roadmap, and then you need to have a strong assessment. During the keynote, it was mentioned about the quality of the data, and that's really, really a key concern, and I can really jump on it. It's really important to have a reliable data to build a reliable assessment. Probably two other topics that are relevant, I guess, is collaboration. And I guess you've mentioned that already. It's fundamental to have a collaboration between all the stakeholders. And probably a last example of concrete action is about investing. Investing, for instance, in energy. And I would like just to stress about what we are doing for our clients, building end-to-end solutions to help them in reducing their carbon footprint by proposing some alternative sourcing of energy through power purchase agreements. It's a fantastic opportunity to source alternative and low carbon energy, but also to secure for the long term pricing and sourcing. And we know from the recent months, and we are currently in a current crisis of energy, that is so critical. And we are seeing for the past 24 months, a very, very high boom of PPA with our clients.
Very nice. Just maybe on the people side, in terms of pressure, do you find from bringing junior talent into KPMG, does the focus on sustainability help?
Yeah, it helps a lot, and I can also reiterate what we have announced a year ago, that we are now a purpose-led company, an entreprise à mission, with the accent. Oh. And it's not an answer, it's a beginning of a journey, and definitely it's completely aligned with expectations coming from our clients and our people.
Yeah. All right, now Bruno, clearly, as you said, it takes a partnership. Government is a key actor. What's your view on the proper role of government in decarbonizing supply chains? And again, a little bit on what France is doing in this space.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, at the Secrétariat Général pour l'Investissement, as you spelled it well, right? Make it simple, France 2030, right?
Very good.
What we do is supporting all those initiatives with 54 billion euros that have been dedicated to innovation. Innovation meant as a way to find solutions and really take over all this problematic that were described before. What we do concretely, we help companies to invest in risky business. Like obviously when the company just mentioned greener product, greener factories, greener attitude, right? Very often the shareholders are reluctant to overinvest in meaning, well, is it really right? And if the global feeling is definitely around this idea that we need to work with a certain emergency, we've seen that definitely government is helping. But we've lived this before. We are at this stage of our society, I would say even at our humanity, where we're moving from a kind of ugly caterpillar into a wonderful butterfly. What do I mean? I mean that we've seen that we're totally changing the way we see life. We overused resources on the planet, and now we have to optimize them. We used to take all those externalities away from the company's responsibilities, and now we integrate them into it. We're looking for more meanings in what we're doing. And all this, if there is no big effort for government to help to accelerate this, will take years, and we don't have any more time. That's why the government is definitely trying to support all innovations in different fields, health, materials, digital, to make it happen.
Maybe just a little briefer on a big issue in France, which is around decarbonization of energy supply. How does that play in, and a little bit the French perspective there?
So 50% of what that's a commitment from the National Assembly. 50% of this budget must be dedicated to decarbonization, which includes, of course, the supplies of decarbonized energy. And we know we have debates about, for instance, the nuclear energy. And we think that we want to mix nuclear and renewable energies because we feel it's a safer way to go. Once more, back to this Rubik cube analogies, with one of the face of this cube for us in France is nuclear energy. It's not the same situation in different countries, so we have to go through compromises. But at the end of the day, I don't know if anybody is right or wrong. I know that for sure, one of this obsession of reducing carbon footprint is the target, the common target for all government. And if we're proven wrong down the road, fine, we'll adopt other strategies. But as far as the French government is concerned, we feel like this is a mix between this investment in nuclear and renewable energy that will make it at the end of the day.
Very good. And then maybe, again, as you started to do, focusing beyond France, what's your thought on the variation in policies across countries? Is some of the competition we're seeing healthy, productive? Is the collaboration sufficient?
Well, three different points. First, the awareness of this climate change is at different level in different countries. I was just before discussing on the floor with the major cosmetic companies, and they've made huge effort in creating greener products. For instance, solid shampoo, right? But effectively, fact is that in some countries, the habits of people are such that they don't buy solid shampoo. And it reduced by whatever, 70, 50, 80,
I want to ask how many people
90%.
use solid shampoo? No.
Yeah, how many of you use this? Very good example.
Now's the time. You can
Well, because
proudly...
and that's the reason why you come at ChangeNOW, because you're a certain profile. But the reality is that, because I just got these numbers, 200 million bottles of shampoos are sold in France per year, and only 1 million of those 200 are solid shampoo. Yeah. Just to say that will take time. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and try and try again. And that's the principle of this common effort and joint effort.
Thibault, the pharma industry has a long history of interacting with government. Maybe you could comment a little bit from your perspective on the role of government in decarbonization, but how also it's interacting with other government policies sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good question, because decarbonation obviously comes with massive investment. Especially, with production side. So, and this is where the difficult equation, or usually I call it the scissor effect, where you've got in one hand inflation, about 30% for us, huge investment, as we have just communicated, is 400 million, and then the other end you've got pricing of drugs, which are regulated because it's reimbursed by the social security in France, and France has the lowest price in Europe. And at the same time, the pharma industry is one of the most taxable, I don't know if it's English, industry. So, and the tax are going up every year and every year. So that's where it's extremely complicated for us, because you want, and we've got a strong will of investing and doing some decarbonation, but at the same time, like food industry where you can increase your price, for example, to follow the inflation, we cannot do it. So this is this difficult scissor effect that, as you're saying, which is difficult to manage. So that's why we need to work with government on pricing, on taxes, getting some support also to decarbonate, for example, Ventolin. Ventolin is about €2 for 200 puff, which is, and the decarbonation of this product is hundreds and hundreds of millions of euros to do it for a product which is, almost sold at the price of the cost of goods. So that's where the equation is difficult, and we need to work together as one.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe Mathieu, do you want to, Carl, before we go back to Bruno and put him on the spot on the price of Ventolin? No, but comments on like what you're seeing in terms and perspectives on the role of private and public partnership here.
Yeah, I think that probably back on government, probably to make some perspective. I think that we strongly believe that there is a place through regulation, and that regulation is a significant driver, to make the transition and to push and to put pressure on companies. And we appreciate that there is a gap of maturity between large corporates and mid-sized companies. And it's probably the difference between regulation for these two categories of companies is probably one of the reason. So we strongly believe that regulation is a very good driver to increase the maturity of ESG within the companies. But probably back to your question, it was around private enterprise and
public. Well, actually, even just on that, maybe just start. Given where you sit, what's your view on sort of reporting standards, and to what extent can the industry sort of get that right, or do you really going to need government to be more forceful on?
Yeah, and actually, if I can jump on this one, it's very much to build on this regulation, which is, by the way, very complex to understand. And honestly, our clients are really anxious about the regulation, have some difficulties to navigate, and part of our role at KPMG is very much to cut through the complexity of this regulation. But again, we are on the right side of the regulation. We consider it's a positive thing to move forward. So again, the role is very much to make the regulation effective, and behind the regulation, it's a question of transparency. And through transparency, it's a question of quality of data. And this is also where we are playing a key role, because as auditors, we put a stamp on such data. So it's a question of trust. But imagine a world sooner than later where we have the full data available, accurate, with the right level of trust. I think that we could do much more.
Bruno, I want to bring you back in, not to push you on pharmaceutical pricing, but just at the more a big picture, what you think is realistic in terms of the timing here, right? So COP26, lots of commitments, lots of enthusiasm, but now we're confronting some of the messy reality of getting there. You've been elected to the National Assembly. You understand the politics of pushing up pricing. What's your perspective?
Well, first of all, we have to kill, I would say, a public opinion that we're late, because France is actually on time for net zero in 2050. We understand the complexity of it. That's why all this data complexity is there. We understand the investment needed, and sometimes the public opinion is late in understanding it, because I understand people live a daily life, and they would complain, well, you invest $54 billion euros in something, and what about schools? What about hospitals? What about my daily life? And then obviously comes the question of the taxes, obviously. How do you finance this? And the answer is, how do you finance life and death, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a planet which is in the emergency room. And in this ER room, we need priorities. We need to decide what we do right and wrong. So in terms of timing, I think the last thing to do when you're on an icy road is to brake. That's the last thing you want to do. You have to, quite the opposite, you have to accelerate, which is not the natural instinct of someone driving, right? Except if you live in Canada or if you live in the middle of the North Pole. Usually when you're on the icy road, you brake. And then you spin, and you never know when you're going. So the role of the government is first to warn you, this is an icy road. Secondly, to teach you, and that's why we're spending 3 billion euros with France 2030 into education to add 1 million people with those new skills, new processes, new structure, new ways to build buildings, and so on. And the third responsibility of the government is to make sure that we understand that things has to be in order, and the responsibility of the government is just to tell the truth that yes, if we don't do this, we will not be able to move to a situation that will get you better. So quality of life goes through those efforts, which needs from the government kind of courage to just say honestly that no, when you're in the ER room, you don't treat the patient the same way than when it's just in a very convenient place. And the last thing is, like, the best thing for Ventolin to reduce his carbon footprint is to get a better air, right? A better quality of air, so you don't need to use it, and then mechanically it will be better, a better life for everyone.
Nice. Thank you, Bruno.
Would you agree?
Very nice. Let me maybe pick up on, I'd be interested, the other two panelists think about your talk about skills that we need to build. So when you think about training people, raising awareness, that whole area of this transition, any thoughts on what you're seeing as key skills, capabilities? Yeah, you can start.
Very much increasing the skill of our talents is critical. And thank you for this question. I can really announce today that we have
this was not planned.
Yeah. Okay. That we have built a leadership and training program with HEC, so a well-known business school in France, to really upskill our talents in ESG. So it starts next month. So we will announce. It will be announced tomorrow. So you have the privilege of this 24 hours in advance. So well done. Okay. But obviously, we have two key pillars. It is very much to be dedicated to our clients and to assist our clients. But more than that, training our people and upskilling our people to the right expertise, because it is what we deliver to our clients. It's so important.
So for me, it's a little bit what I've said earlier. I think, it's extremely important. We've got a responsibility, as leadership of an organization, to show the way. So it's exactly what we are doing, pushing, our corporate office, to invest in France, to do this greener product. So this is what we are doing in France. So pitching, our group, to make sure that. So after, employees see it and say, okay, so we have, the will, we have the level of investment. So GSK in France is really, leading the way in this carbon footprint reduction. So after, it's sending a strong message to your teams and employees. So, okay, if they are doing it at this level, what can I do at my level? And this is what also we are doing with the shifter, what I was saying earlier, and different, a lot of activities, but small one, one by one. You go really layer by layer, and everybody can, have this contribution. And we've got some very good examples today. For example, we are doing the public-private. You were speaking earlier, and just was thinking that we have a big vaccine site in the north of France, and we are producing for almost 120 countries. And here, we have done a partnership with the state, with EDF, to put some heat pump. So it's really seems to be simple. It's massive investment, again, but we are reducing by 50% the emission, and we are reducing also the energy cost that we are mentioning earlier. And that's really a strong will. And if you do it in your factory, you could do it at home also, and you just showcase. And this is the way you do it. It's kind of a positive cycle.
Just one brief thing from INSEAD. So over the last few years, we started building more sustainability teaching and modules, and it wasn't selling, for example. People would ask about it, oh, that's really nice. And in the last, 12, 14 months, it started to sell. So you really start to see companies now getting more serious and building the skills. So it's one encouraging sign. Maybe one last thing before we wrap up. Maybe, Mathieu, we need to look, obviously, for all the leverage points we can. And if I think about business and transforming business, one huge area of capability is private equity. I'm not sure how many private equity people we've seen around here, but they have tremendous business models and capabilities in transforming. I guess you work with some of them. What's your view on, are we going to see some of that engine linked up to green and decarbonization?
I really believe that PE firms can really make a change. Just to give you one number, PE firms contribute or altogether $3 trillion in terms of cash available. And if you consider the financial indebtedness, you can even double or triple this amount. So it's not a question of cash. The cash is here and is available for investment. And by the way, we have seen an increase of alternative fund dedicated to investment in ESG. But more than that, and I will share with you a second key number, is that 30% of mid-sized companies in France have a PE firm as a shareholder. So it's a massive opportunity for them to transform companies in that direction and to invest properly to make a better future and to transform that business model.
Yeah. So anyway, for those who are with solutions, we definitely need to build bridges between people with the solutions and some of these private equity firms over the coming years. All right, we're going to wrap up. I guess as you look at the audience, any last piece of advice or call to action for corporate leaders in this space, your peers?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, you can go first. Yeah.
So what I like to say is adopt a AAA strategy. So I mean by AAA, it's assess, address, and act. So it's pretty simple, but the assessment is really understand your carbon footprint. Sometimes, as you said, Maya, it's very difficult, but let's give a try. Address, you know where you've got some gaps and you really understand what you could potentially do. So really address these different matters, layers by layers. You don't want to do everything at the same time. And the last one is act. Act is like for us, in our case, we know that 50% of the carbon footprint is coming from one product. So rather than doing thousands of things, act, prioritize, and invest where you can really have an impact. So AAA.
Very good. Mathieu, and then Bruno, you're going to get the last one.
Yeah, happy to join here. I think that the direction of travel is very clear. There is a question around accelerating the pace of execution, and that's really crystallizing some value for those who can anticipate. And more than ever, you should put ESG in everything you do.
All right. Bruno, closing words.
Well, in the situation we're in, I think the most important action is to build trust. To build trust and to make people believe. And if you doubt about it, look in my back. This thing, the Eiffel Tower, at that time, was just impossible to conceive and to build. And effectively, it's here. And it's been used at the originally just as a showcase of technologies, so something fairly useless. But now it's used as one of the main transmitter of information and telecommunication of Paris, which means that, as the Japanese says, Inase Banaru, which means if there is a will, there is a way, and there's definitely a will at the government.
All right. Thank you. Big round of applause. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. So we're going to go to Orange Group and close with Jean-Benoît Besset, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility at Orange Group. We'll get your music, sir. So we could say this is a fireside chat, but actually we're going to say this is an Eiffel side chat. There you go. So a new concept in speaking. I guess let's start at the beginning. So what is the carbon footprint that you have at Orange Group? What are your key drivers?
Maybe some words.
Yeah.
Orange first.
Yes.
I'm sure that everybody knows Orange, but 2 words, two figures. 25 countries. We're operating in 25 countries, mainly in Europe and Africa. And 140,000 people working for Orange. That's the only two words I will give
No,
you.
that's right.
To fix
Actually, it's going to be quite interesting because
now-
we can compare decarbonization in Europe versus Africa, which are not
That-
exactly the same thing.
That's not at all the same thing. What is our carbon emissions? 7.3 million tons. The orange carbon emission is 7.3 million tons. Is this number accurate? I don't know. We believe that on scope 3, everybody knows scope 1, 2, and 3, I'm sure here. We believe that on scope 3, the margin of error is something like between 10 and 20%. Is it enough for, if you want to do a financial budget, you cannot come to the place saying, I have an EBITDA, and I'm sure that the number is right with a margin of error of 10 to 20%. But to act on carbon, that's enough. Yeah. So how does it split? Because we have 3 scopes, mainly in scope 3. Our scope 1 is 0.3 million tons. And why do we have a scope 1? Scope 1 when you are burning fossil fuels, because we are operating in Africa. And in Africa, the grid is not always even present or not always so good. So we had lots of diesel generators to power our sites. Our scope 2 is 0.9 million tons. We are operating, half of the electricity we are using is in France. So France, as you know, is quite a low carbon country, but we are also operating in countries where it's not exactly the same case. For example, in France, for 1 gigawatt hours, you have 50 tons of CO2, 55 tons of CO2. In Poland, it's 600 tons, and our personal record at Orange is Botswana, 1,370 tons of CO2 per gigawatt hours. So once again, you don't have the same challenges in Botswana as in France.
Whoa. And scope 3?
Scope 3, then it's 6 million tons. Mainly on what we call the upstream, which is what we are buying, in fact. And upstream represents 90%, 90% of our scope 3. And why so? Because we are processing lots of things. First, services. We had a lot of people who are maintaining the networks, what we call in our language fields operation. Fields operation and civil works, because we dig trenches to put fibers, we construct poles, etc., represent roughly a third of our scope 3. Then we are buying lots of equipment to put on the tower, for example, for mobile or in our data center, in our sites. It represents roughly a fourth of carbon emission. And then we have these things, smartphones, because we are buying and selling smartphones. So these things, for example, is something like 40 kilos, 40 kilos of CO2. It counts in Orange scope 3, because we are buying the thing and selling the thing. And moreover, it uses power to be charged. But the main part of the CO2 emission for devices comes from the manufacturing, especially in countries like France. Obviously, not the same situation in Botswana, for example.
And so what is...
And we also have boxes. So smartphone devices is roughly it's a big 10% of our carbon emission, and boxes, the internet box you have at home, is 10% of the carbon emission, counting manufacturing and usage.
And so now that you've laid that out, what's the ambition and where are the priorities in terms of tackling this?
The ambition is quite simple. We know at Orange only one figure about 2040, which is net zero carbon. I don't know what will be the EBITDA, I don't know what will be the revenue, but I know that we will be net zero carbon, which means that we will divide by 10 our CO2 emission between the starting point, which was 2018, and 2040. And we will compensate the 10 remaining percentage, because when you are doing activities, you emit carbon. We will compensate it through what we call carbon pits, which are forest, but mainly mangrove. We are investing in mangrove in Cameroon or Madagascar, for example. Cameroon mangrove. Madagascar is something else. And we already have secured roughly what we need for 2030 in terms of carbon pits.
And
Yeah, go on. It's a good thing to have a target, a long-term target. But if you had no milestone, it's useless, because you always say, I will do it later on, because nobody in a company have a plan for 2040. It's even hard to have a plan for 2030. So we have milestones, and we have carbon emission milestone in 2025, and we have a carbon emission milestone in 2030. And then 2040, it will be net zero.
And just to dig in, how are things different between like the African operations, the French, some of the European?
So I give you some insight about energy, for example. But if you take the numbers I give you and if you calculate rapidly, you realize that Scope 3 represents 83% of Orange emission. But that's the average. In France, Scope 3 represents 93% of carbon emission. Why so? Because we have quite a decarbonized electricity, and we have very, very few diesel generators for our mobile sites, because they are only there when we have a switch off, which is not often. But if you look at Africa, at Middle East and Africa, Scope 3 represents only 55%. You see the distance between France, which is half of our operation in Europe, 93% in Scope 3, Middle East and Africa, 55%. So definitely you don't have to do the same things in both geography, and that's a key point. If you want to be efficient, you have to de-average what you are doing. You have to do contextual action that are pertinent for the location you are working in. For example, decarbonization of energy, I'm sorry, might not be a priority in France, because we have nuclear energy. When I said because we already have a low carbon energy. Nevertheless, we are signing PPAs in France, and we'll keep on going with PPA, because I perfectly agree with what has been said. We don't have to oppose nuclear and renewable. We have to do both of them at the same time and at the right pace. That's the challenge. But in Poland, for example, we will come up with 100% renewable energy, because in Poland, it's more than 10 times more CO2 for the electricity.
How do you, again, maybe probing a little bit on Africa as well, I mean, you're responsible for CSR in general. So do you find interactions, conflicts, need to balance decarbonization and some of the social parts of your responsibilities?
Yes, maybe you have seen this morning Kate Redforth, the inventor of the donut theory.
The donut theory, yes.
And the donut theory has saved me, in fact, because the first time I looked at the environmental impact, the only solution is to stop business, in fact. That's the best way, in fact. In order to decarbonize, you have to do two things: decrease the volume and decarbonize the volume you are buying, for energy, for goods, for everything. But then if you want to come to a minus 90%, then you have to stop activities. But when you look at the donut theory, you realize that because we consider at Orange that internet access is an essential social need, you realize that you have to do this. And when you are building networks, and when you are educating people to use digital technology, then you permit them to get off the center of the donut to be inside the donut. And that's why, for example, we know that between now and 2025, we will increase our energy consumption in the African and Middle East zone by 25%. We will stabilize it in Europe unless we are developing networks, unless we have a huge explosion of traffic, of digital traffic, etc. We know that we have to at least stabilize and even decrease in Europe to afford to increase it in Middle East and Africa. And that's the same for Scope 3. If I look at the last 4 years, we have decreased our Scope 3 emission in Europe, but we have increased it by 30% in Middle Zone and Africa, and Middle East and Africa. We call it MEA in Orange. So I will say MEA. You will know that MEA is Middle East and Africa. So we have increased it by a third, in fact. Why so? Because we are deploying network.
Okay, what are the practical challenges in sort of getting this done in your supply chain with your partners, or even within Orange? It's impressive to hear your command of the numbers, the footprint, but if I called in business leaders from Orange, would they have the same awareness? How's the transformation both within and outside Orange? How does that go?
First, we have to understand and to share a common language. And that's tough, in fact. Because as I mentioned to you, the solution is what we call the double less. Less volume, less carbon in each piece you are buying. Energy, smartphone, equipment for the network, cars that are going through the countries to maintain the network, etc. So if you go to a marketing guy and say, hey guy, the solution is to sell 10% less smartphone in 2030 compared to today, his first reaction will not be, okay. So we have to educate them, and we have a plan. We will sell less smartphone in 2030 than we are selling today, and we are selling less smartphone today than we were selling 4 years ago. just because we encourage our customer to expand the life of their smartphone, for example. So what we have to do is to make them understand what is at stake, in fact. Because we all know the responsibility we have, but business is also at stake. How will we be able to operate in 10 years if we cannot decarbonize our processes and our business model? Just take one example. Today, in the European market, a ton of carbon in 2024 costs 90 euros, 90. Orange is 7.3 million tons of carbon. If we had to pay for, which is not the case today because digital technology is not a big emitting, so we are not submitted to this type of constraint, but if we had to pay for these externalities, as we say, then it will be something like 650 million euros. In 2030, we'll know that it will be at least 200 euros. Then it's 1.4 billion euros. Can a company like Orange afford this? No. Will we pay carbon taxes, carbon credits? Certainly, not sure. Most probably, we won't be taxed for that. But we will buy energy, we will buy products from companies that may be taxed for that. So at the end of the day, we will have to pay for this externality we are not paying today. So if we are not able to manage this externality, we are just closing business, in fact. And another example is about what we call the critical minerals. We have identified 6 metals, which we can find in a fourth, 25% of what we are buying. These 6 metals we know are in tension and will be rare metals in 2030. What happens when something is rare? It's more expensive. So if we have an increase in the price of the equipment we are buying containing gold, for example, and you have gold in a smartphone, you have gold in a router, you have gold in a mobile antenna, then it will be a challenge for us. So our message, the message we have to give to the manager is that CSR is just not the goodies that is good at the end of the annual report to say, I have ticked the case. We say, tick the box.
Yes.
I have ticked the... No, it's not that. It's a question of business. That's why we said now at Orange that we should be ESG by design. That's what has been said previously. ESG should be at the heart of the way you consider the business. You don't have to ask you what will be my carbon emission or what will be my energy consumption at the end of your strategic plan, but at the beginning of it.
Very nice. Any reactions to some of the things we talked about earlier, your view on the role of government in the space or data, some of those topics?
Data is something that is quite obvious for us at Orange. Data is key. I remember the 3A. The first one is assess. You need data. You don't need to have very perfect data because the seek for perfection is a nevrose, we say in France. It's a nevrose. You speak French, you can translate nevrose in English. Whoa, nevrosis, thank you.
Sorry.
So you don't have to be perfect to act. But you have at least to know where you are. And there is the joke in France, which is I call the joke of the lighting. A guy is losing his key, and he's charging his key where there is light. He has lost his key there, but there it's dark. So there's no light, so he's looking for his key under the light. And that's exactly 4 years ago what we were doing by Orange. We were looking the carbon reduction in energy, which is 10% of our emission. So it's very important to have this data just to know where to act. You don't have to know if it doesn't have to be accurate at 1-5%, whatever. But at least we know that we have a problem in Scope 3. We know that in MEA zone we have a problem in energy, and we have to put solar sites. We have more than 7,000 solar sites in MEA, or roughly 20% of the sites we have in the MEA zone are powered by solar panels, for example. And we know that we have to get rid of these diesel generators. There is a country, I won't say it, where we have 98% of our mobile sites that are connected 24 hours a day to a diesel generator. If we put some solar panels here, it would be a good thing. For cost also, by the way.
Also, it's security as well, perhaps. But so you're in the middle of a big transition. You seem quite motivated by this journey. What is it that keeps you personally?
I didn't answer your question about government.
Yeah, you didn't. You want to go?
Please don't build regulatory cathedrals.
Don't what?
Don't build regulatory cathedrals.
Ah, yeah, cathedral, yes.
There is something, maybe the CSRD, Customer Social Responsibility Disclosure, is the new European reporting.
Yes.
It's really a nice thing. It's far better than what we had before, but the CSRD is 1,100 data points that we have to come up each year. And that's not obvious data point like the customer number, your customer number. That might be a very specific data points. So we really have to never forget that this type of reporting should help us to pilot our business to transition. And that should be for the sake of the reporting itself. So we have to make first the double materiality analysis. Where do I have an impact on the planet and people? And then report precisely on this one. And the other one, if it's not material for us, too bad. Don't spend hours to report on this one. That's a message.
That
Government, by the way, is also
motivating.
It's also very important because we need government action, for example, to develop circular economy. When I buy today something, I don't know what is the LCA, life cycle analysis of this thing. And that's too bad. I would love to have a European directive or a French directive obliging people to say when I buy a router, then the LCA of the router in terms of water, CO2, etc. is that.
So he wants to trade the CRD for circular reporting.
No,
there you go.
We will do CSRD and we are preparing for it. And that's a good thing. I prefer to have this type of regulation that other types.
So Jean-Benoît, thank you for, I think, again, what we were looking for, real concrete views of what you're wrestling with. Same question for you. Any final calls to action or advice for your peers?
Advice, be operational, be precise. It's fully necessary to have global objectives like minus 45% between now and 2030. But you will really change things when you dig into the processes. The people who are responsible for the carbon emission at Orange are not the people of my team. They are the operational. The people responsible for carbon in Moldavia is the CEO of Moldavia. It's not me. And the people responsible for carbon emission of network in Moldavia is the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of Moldavia, etc. So that's the key message. In fact, the ones who are responsible of the CO2 emission are the ones who are managing the operation. Exactly the same thing for the cost.
Very good. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Jean-Benoît.
Thank you.